Because my reasonability is simple. If it says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, then yes, I should definitely have a personal nuke. 100%. Cat Slave says, you think we should let people who can't even change a car tire own nukes? You're demented. Cat Slave, I don't think you should have access to a keyboard, but you do. What are you talking? It's not about what you think or I think. I just went through this. Are you that fucking stupid? When they wrote them down, they knew that dumb people existed. They predicted you would write something that stupid in a comment on YouTube that they couldn't have even known would exist. And they said, some dummy is going to say something real fucking stupid on November 8th at 1:04 a.m. Central Time. And we're going to have to remind them that it doesn't matter what anybody thinks because we removed your thought from consideration. And until you just take one vote and change the wording to match the advancement in technology in arms, then no. And the reality is, until you do that thing, you don't either. And anyone who's dumb enough to say, but Nick, someone is too stupid for this. And it's saying you were too stupid to be able to say what you said in this instance. Because if we, as a society, can't come to the simple understanding that maybe you shouldn't give nukes to a guy named Cat Slave, then we agree that Cat Slave should own the nuke. Whether he can change a tire or spell correctly or not is irrelevant. Because if the argument is you can't change a tire, why should you own a nuke? The argument should similarly be, if you can't change a tire, why should you own an AR-15? Why should you own a handgun? Why should you own a kitchen knife? And I beseech you to logically explain where the magical line is, where suddenly the guy who can't change a tire can own every weapon up to this level of destruction and no further. And I will humbly suggest that your argument will be deficient every time. Because of course your argument will be deficient. There's no way to determine what thing is suddenly too dangerous. That's why they wrote it down. If any idiot can determine something to be too dangerous, then everything is too dangerous. Cat Slave, I've got to admit, I've hurt myself more often with kitchen knives than with guns. Get sharper knives, bro. But if you can arbitrarily determine one type of weapon to be more dangerous than another and sufficiently more dangerous to restrict ownership, then they can too. And you're reasonable because you say nukes. And they're reasonable because they say anything with a high explosive charge. And then someone else is reasonable when they say, well, anything that can travel at 2,000 feet per second. Then the next one's like, well, anything really over, supersonic speed. So anything over 750 miles an hour, that's really too dangerous. And they're like, well, actually subsonic rounds are very lethal and they can harm children. And it will always come down to harming children. It will start with, well, everyone can agree that nukes shouldn't be in the hands of crazy people, to suddenly everyone can agree that, a 22 in the hands of a child is more dangerous than anything else in a home to that child. We've got to stop that from happening. Again, you believe you are reasonable because you have a limit that you find reasonable. But the reasonability of your limit is irrelevant to anyone else's consideration because your reasonability is shit to me. Because my reasonability, as expressed by you, was shit to you, right? Because my reasonability is simple. If it says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, then yes, I should definitely have a personal nuke. 100%. And you're like, that's unreasonable. That level of reasonability is shit. Here's mine, which is better. No, yours is relatively better to your perspective, but it's not objectively better. There's no objective correctness about mine versus yours, other than mine comports with the language that was written down and yours comports with bullshit. And yours is the justification for every infringement on the Second Amendment and the First Amendment and the Fourth and the Fifth and the Sixth and the Seventh and the Eighth that exists. I won't go into the third because there aren't very many. Every infringement into our absolute rights is justified because someone says, well, that's unreasonable, though, to me. But we didn't ask you. They didn't ask anybody. They wrote down and said, you don't get to ask. Take notes. Because that was the idea. We shit all over it and fucked ourselves a long time ago. But logically argue against owning a nuke versus owning a fully automatic rifle, a semi-automatic rifle, a handgun. Logically argue. You can kill a lot of people with a nuke. Well, someone who's smart can kill a lot of people with a hammer. Takes longer, so. Again, if you want nukes to not be personally owned, really simple, and probably one of the easiest goddamn amendments to pass, because only a few people are as insane as I am. You just say, an amendment to the Second Amendment, but not nukes, though. There you go. Simple enough. What about ammonia and fertilizer? Should you be able to own those two things together? Ask Oklahoma City and the FBI there, right? Was it reasonable? Would it have been reasonable to prevent the ownership of ammonia and fertilizer? They have legitimate purposes, even in large volumes. It's tough, man. It's tough. It's a tough question. And that's why they took it away. Simply Green says, theoretically, if you had a property space for a subsurface detonation, that might be okay. No. Nope. You're working from the problem backwards every time. Everybody works from this backwards. You try to come up with a scenario in which it would be okay to detonate a nuclear weapon privately. That's not the question. You don't have a right to shoot somebody in a Walmart. You don't have a right to even fire a gun in a Walmart unless you're defending someone. You have justification, which presumes that you don't have the right. You have a right to fire a gun when you're not causing harm to someone else's person, property, or other considerations, right? Like, we get that, but why can't I own the nuke? Well, you might blow it up. Well, make blowing it up illegal outside of very limited contexts. But they're going to do it anyway. Oh, you just made the same argument for the assault weapons ban. Congratulations, you're a Democrat. I don't know how to say this other than that, but so many people just don't get it. Of course it's unreasonable to own high explosive devices. Of course it's unreasonable to own a nuclear weapon. Why? Well, you might blow it up, but that wouldn't be legal. I mean, yeah, if you own as much of Montana as Ted Turner does, boom, blow it up. I don't care. But why can't you own it? Why can't I have it sitting in a glass case? Because I might do something illegal with it? Bad argument. Very bad argument. Very dangerous road. Very slippery slope. The slope's slipperier than your mom. Talking about legality after, I guess. Again, it's really simple. You can have a very reasonable determination that some level of weapon should not be owned by an individual. What you can't do is restrict it under the Second Amendment now as it's written. Unless you do mental gymnastics that have no actual legitimate barrier. There is no logical difference between owning any weapon and owning every weapon based on how the Second Amendment was written. There isn't any. And if you say one type is good and another type is bad, then any type can be good and every type can be bad. At some point, all you have to do is fit your reasoning into the political will that was removed by the amendment in the first place. So, if you think that nuclear weapons should be off limits to citizens, you're in the majority, and all you have to do is easily pass an amendment that says, not nukes though. Done. And then you would be correct. But until you do, the current wording of the Second Amendment does not support your position. To get to your position, you have to disregard reason. You have to disregard language. You have to disregard the arbitrary nature of your opinion. The arbitrary nature of your opinion is fine once you codify it through sufficient political will. Because, let's be real, the Second Amendment in and of itself is an arbitrarily decided perspective. There's no logical or rational reason which separates gun ownership from anything else on the planet. Other than they said, arbitrarily, we're worried about what might happen if this is not specifically protected. Therefore, we will protect it. That's it. But that's based on their arbitrary values in a time and place. Now, they're informed by all of history. They're informed by recent history where guns were taken away from the places where they came from. They're informed by a lot of stuff, but in a vacuum, it's all arbitrary. You can own guns, but you can't own, they're going to protect the ownership of guns, but they won't protect the ownership of medicine, glue, food. You have better access right now, better access and rights to a semi-automatic rifle than you do to milk that comes directly from a cow and not from a factory. Think about that. Think about the arbitrary nature of the Second Amendment in and of itself. Of course, the amendments are arbitrary. There's no logical guiding principle that is objective that says these things should be protected because, of course, they should. It's a value system that values liberty to the maximum at the time and balances it with the fears that they had from what might be taken. But that is arbitrary throughout history. And the fact that you can't buy raw milk, but you can buy a rifle that is sufficiently able to murder an entire school full of children very easily is weird, isn't it? Like, when you get down to it, it's fucking weird. The government can regulate away raw milk, but they can't regulate away an AR-15. And I prefer that. I would just prefer that the milk were sufficiently protected, honestly. But people get confronted with the arbitrary nature of their decisions, and they get offended by that as if other decisions aren't similarly arbitrary. No, they all are. There's no thing that says speech is somehow necessary, somehow worthy of protection. They're just like, I think the government might take this away. We don't want them to do that based on our experience. Cool. They wrote it down. Same with guns, same with quartering soldiers, same with everything. Plenty of theoretical civilizations could exist without any of these rights and be functional. A bunch of people want our civilization to exist without the First Amendment at all. And it would still be functional. You could say approve things all day. It'd be great. But stop being offended by the fact that your opinion is arbitrary, that doesn't have a logical or sound basis or an objective basis. Because once you start getting into that concept, then you get into the same mentality as that justifies infringing it. And that's why they took it away from you, just like they took it away from them. Because if you think the answer to the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed has some sort of caveat to it, you are on the same side as the person who would ban butter knives. You're just in a different scale. And if you're just in a different scale, then you're playing the wrong fucking sport, and you can excuse yourself out the back door and hope a cock isn't coming in after you, fag. We don't want you here. If you don't like the amendment, just change it. It's fine to change it. But just know that changing it should be weighed and measured. And even though it is arbitrary, it should be done with caution and consideration. Also know that every argument you have about the destructive capability of some particular weapon shouldn't be in the hands of one person. Realize that the weapons of mass destruction at the time of the founding, capable of holding entire cities at siege, leveling entire settlements, and sparking and waging war across the globe on behalf of the United States, were owned by private citizens. The nukes of the day were in the hands of the me's and you's. The Waltons would have owned warships. Bezos would have an entire fucking fleet of steel-plated wooden ships with big fucking cannons on them going around blowing up the Barbary pirates and shit, just so they could Amazon Prime some shit to Ethiopia in 2 to 3 weeks or whatever. At the time of the founding, the warship, which could lay siege to New York City by itself, could have been owned by your dumb neighbor. And you're going to sit here and tell me that a 51-pound nuke couldn't be a 51-pound warhead? Let's see. What was that? What's the destructive capability? Blast radius M388 Davy Crockett. Let's see. Yield of 20 tons of TNT. You tell me. What's more devastating? One 20-ton of a TNT round or a warship? Which one? Which one's more dangerous? Which one has a greater propensity for devastation? Effects. Most training shots landed within 10 feet of the point of aim. CEP under 50 meters with 100% instant casualty radius in excess of 160 meters, 520 feet. The greatest effect would have been its extreme prompt neutron radiation, which would have killed most of the enemy troops inside that circle within minutes. Its blast would do very little, if any, damage to the enemy's tracked vehicles. Troops further away would have died within hours, days, and less than 2 weeks, depending on their range from the point of burst and the thickness of their protection. The blast is not a danger to the crew as long as they followed normal procedures. Blah, 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 blah. So, again, like, it's a nuclear weapon, sure. 520 feet is pretty big, 1/10 of a mile. It's cool. But there's a lot more devastating things than that exist. And you can own them. Anyway, this, oh God, it's such a frustrating fucking discussion because someone always comes up with the thing. Well, you shouldn't be. Yes, you should. Of course you should. Change it. Just change it. Most Queen says, I will never put a nuke on the same level as owning a gun. I think it is something that is covered by my right to own a pistol. Nick is free to call me a fag for disagreeing. No, you're not a fag for disagreeing. You're a fag for thinking that the Second Amendment contemplates your decision between those two. It doesn't. It obviously doesn't. Just amend it. Just amend it. Guys, I'm telling you, it's something like 80% of the country agrees with you. Just amend it. Why is it so hard? Why are we so resistant to this? Just amend it. You know why? You know why they are so resistant to it? They're afraid of the answer. Just amend it. Everybody agrees with you, right? Just amend it. Or you're going to leave it in the hands of a judge. Because if you leave the nuke in the hands of a judge, then you leave the rifle in the hands of a judge, then you leave the pistol in the hands of the judge. And the court, or the founder said, no judge should ever have to answer this question. And it's frustrating that we're still stuck here. You guys have been so thoroughly propagandized that, oh, my right to own a pistol. You don't have a right to own a pistol. You have a right to own everything. Why would it be limited to a pistol? Let me just say one more time. If you are one of those people who believe that the Second Amendment exists because you have a right to self-defense, let me simply, humbly say you are sufficiently incorrect as to merit bludgeoning yourself to death with a toilet bowl. The Second Amendment is not for your self-defense. The Second Amendment is not for liberation from tyranny. The Second Amendment is not for your hunting rights or sporting rights. The Second Amendment is not to protect from ma British, ma French, ma Maggie hoo-hoos. It is not for protection from Canadians or anybody else. The Second Amendment exists because the right to keep and bear arms exists solely because it does, not for a reason. You do not need to ever capitulate to a justification for the right. The right exists because the right exists. If you offer some sort of capitulation as to why the right exists, they will always have an argument around your reasoning. Well, do citizens maintain an adequate measure of self-defense? Sure. A handgun is sufficient to defend yourself. Lots of people kill people with handguns. That should be fine. What if I don't want to defend myself with a handgun? What if I want to defend myself with a claymore mine? What if I want to set up traps around my house? Put up signs that say, if you enter here, I'll kill you. Well, that's beyond adequate. Therefore, you don't have a right to it. Why not? I don't think you need it. I don't think you need 15 rounds in your handgun, guys. That's the court right here. Do you have adequate self-defense? Why would you need 15 rounds? 10 rounds is adequate. Oh, I'm sorry. What if there are 13 Mormons trying to rape me for Jesus or whatever? Not the real Jesus, the other Jesus who came later. Just reload. Fuck you. If you provide the reason, they will justify the restriction within the confines that you give them. Every time. Every fucking time. It's a defense against tyranny. Well, there is no sufficient defense against the government having nukes, so why would you have a nuke, right? Like, imagine that. Well, the government wouldn't turn its guns on its own people. That seems silly. I mean, they do a lot. Just ask Waco.